I'd like to introduce some of our staff here, our board, our vice chair, Mr. Mike Barnaby, our membership chair, Ms. Teresa Langell, our two timekeepers over here, transportation chair, agreement and education, Ms. Michelle Riley, and our master at arms, sergeant at arms, Larry Corn. Where are you?
Do we need one?
Well, you never know. Some people are pretty rowdy.
Yes, because Waverly's here.
Our treasurer will be right back, but that's Don Rogan, right? So every year we have a convention of states legislation that comes before the General Assembly, and last year it was left in the Rules Committee. We have a Congress that is out of control, $20 trillion in the debt. What should we do about it? And so tonight, before we start, we would like to hear a prayer from one of our very own, our Virginia Beach Senator, Mr. Bill DeSteffe. Senator Bill DeSteffe.
Can you hear me in the back? Well, if you could join me in prayer, please bow your head. Lord, please bless those who protect us, both home and abroad. Please a special prayer out to those who lost their lives and were injured in New York yesterday. We pray for civility across all walks of life. And please bless this meeting tonight. Let those who have opinions be able to express them in a kind manner. In that I pray, just me. Amen.
Amen. I would now like to introduce our vice chair to take over the meeting. I will be collecting question cards from you, so if you have them, see me.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you would please stand to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please take your seats.
Phyllis!
Tonight's debate will use the index card system. If you don't have an index card already, just raise your hand and someone will bring an index card to you. Once you finish writing your question on the card, please raise that card up in the air and one of our staff will come pick the card up from you. If you need to leave the auditorium during tonight's debate, please use the exit located at the top of the stairs. Our moderator tonight is a graduate of the University of Chicago Law School and has been an associate professor at Regent University School of Law since 2001. His teaching expertise includes constitutional law, foundations of law, constitutional criminal procedure, and nonprofit tax-exempt organizations. And now, without any further ado, please join me in a round of applause for our moderator, Regent University's very own, Professor Bradley Jacob.
Well, thank you very much. It is my delight to be here this evening and be able to take part in this event. Let me just give you a little overview of where we're going this evening. I'm going to start things off and try to lay a little context of what we're talking about. And then we have in front of us four distinguished gentlemen, two who are arguing for a convention of the states and two who are arguing opposed. And we will start by giving each side a 5-minute opening statement, which can be one of the two or trading off the time, however they want to do that among themselves. But each side will have 5 minutes, starting with the affirmative, the in favor of the convention, and then going to those who are opposed. After the opening statements, we'll move directly to questions. So if you can be writing down any questions you have on these little cards, I will try to sift through those and find what I think are really good questions to give to the panelists and let them respond. We will, I guess the first question, I'll pick who goes first, which side goes first, and after that we'll just alternate so that everyone goes first on each question. And for each question, each side has 2 minutes, which again can be either of the two speakers or they they can split the time, that's up to them. 2 minutes for one side, 2 minutes for the other. There's no rebuttal, and then we go on to the next question. I think gentlemen, we're all in agreement on that format. That works for everyone? Okay. So, and then at the end, there will be closing statements. Each side will have 5 minutes at the end. We'll try to wrap it up pretty close to 8 o'clock. We might run just a few minutes beyond that. Let me start. I'll start by taking my watch off so I don't lose track of the time, because I don't, there's a clock, but my old eyes can't see it very well. Let me start by giving you the constitutional provision that we're dealing with here tonight. Article 5 of the Constitution deals with amendments, and there are 2 different procedures listed in the Constitution's Article 5 to make amendments. Only the first has ever been used. Starts out, the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution. Okay? So, in the, 240 or something, 230 years that we've been under the Constitution, that's the only procedure that has been used to amend the Constitution. An amendment passes the House and the Senate, each by a 2/3 majority, and then goes on to ratification, which I'll mention in a minute. There are 27 amendments. 11 of them were part of the original Bill of Rights. There was another little flurry after the Civil War. There were a few at the beginning of the 20th century in the so-called Progressive era. Not very many amendments for a document that's been around as long as our Constitution. But there is a second procedure listed in Article 5. It says, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments. So 2/3 of the state legislatures must pass a measure calling on Congress to set up a convention, constitutional convention, a convention of states. The Constitution itself just says a convention. If 2/3 of the states, which is 34, submit that call, Congress must call a convention to gather and consider amendments to the Constitution. This has never been done. And our question for tonight is, should it be done? Are we at a place in our nation's constitutional history where the only way to get this thing straightened out and working right is to convene a group of people? Who are those people? Political folks? Crazy law professors like me? Who knows? Who knows who that group will be? Maybe our panelists want to discuss that issue. I don't know. But convene this group of people who would then propose one or more amendments to the Constitution. Now, in either event, whether amendments come out of the House and the Senate or come out of a convention, they then have to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. That's 38 out of 50. And Congress can do it one of 2 ways, either by state legislatures, which is, again, the only way it's been done up till now, or by special state ratifying conventions. If Congress says, yeah, these amendments, we don't want them to go to the state legislatures, we want each state to call a special ratifying convention, Congress can specify that. And so our question on the floor for this evening is, should we have such a convention? Is it time to convene a convention of the states to consider amendments to the Constitution? Those in favor of the idea of a convention, at the far end of the table, Mr. David Dietrich with the Convention of States Project, and Mr. Gary Porter of the Constitution Leadership Institute. Those opposing this idea, sitting closer to me, Mr. John Bloom of the Patriots of the Constitution Party, and Mr. Jeff Lewis of the Patriot Coalition. If they want to give more of their background, they can work that in as they're speaking in their opening statements. But I don't think you want to listen to me do any more introductions. let's move into the substance. So we'll start with the advocates for the convention. Gentlemen, you have 5 minutes to make an opening statement.
Thank you. In the 5 minutes it will take me to give you my opening statement, the U.S. national debt will increase nearly $5 million in this time. Let that sink in while I explain why amending the Constitution through an Article 5 convention is absolutely essential. Former Congressman Peter Stark of California put it this way: the federal government today can do most anything in this country. He is absolutely right, and it shouldn't be that way. As Chief Justice John Roberts affirmed in the first Obamacare decision, the federal government can tax you for any purpose whatsoever, even to coerce you into buying health insurance. In 2 decisions in the 1930s, Congress was given the power to spend money on anything it deemed in the interest of the general welfare, and they were told they can define that term any way they want. Thanks to a decision in 1942, the Congress can regulate any business in this country, whether it engages directly in interstate commerce or not. Thanks to a decision in 1989, Congress was given the permission to delegate its legislative power to executive branch agencies, and they do. And these rules, then, that these executive branch agencies promulgate have the force of law. And these rules add $2 trillion a year to the cost of doing businesses in this country, cost that is passed on to you and I. The other side is going to tell you tonight all we need to do is elect better people to Congress and all will be well. Thomas Jefferson would disagree. He said, in questions of power, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. This would be sound advice, if the Constitution still had any chains. A Constitution which began of one of limited and enumerated powers has been turned into a Constitution that now permits the government to tax without limit, spend without limit, regulate without limit, delegate without limit. Is there anything that Congress cannot do? All this is perfectly legal and constitutional. Do I want to see the Constitution vastly changed or radically changed and replaced? Absolutely not. British statesman William Gladstone called our Constitution the most wonderful work ever struck off at a given time by the brain and purpose of man. I couldn't agree more. But the Constitution was not inspired. It was not perfect. Even George Washington called it the best that could be obtained at this time. But I also agree with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who said the Constitution has proved itself the most marvelously elastic compilation of rules of government ever written. Today, the federal government has become a bloated, intrusive leviathan, meddling in every aspect of our private and public lives. Congress can fix this situation by proposing amendments, or the states can, as you just heard. But I hope it's clear that Congress will never propose an amendment which reduces in any way the awesome power they now enjoy. They will never initiate a term limits amendment. The Senate will never approve an amendment that repeals the 17th Amendment and returns them to appointees of the states. Congress last sent an amendment to the states in 1971. Over those 46 years, hundreds of amendments have been proposed by individual congressmen and never gotten out of committee. Congress is not going to fix this. They are clearly not interested. As you've heard, the Constitution calls this event a convention for proposing amendments. That is the only name the Constitution gives this event. The Constitution does not call it a constitutional convention. It doesn't call it even a convention of the states. So since both sides tonight say they respect the Constitution, I propose that we use that term exclusively tonight, a convention for proposing amendments. Somehow I think the other side may not agree with that. Here's how such a convention would work as proposed by Citizens for Self-Governance. 34 states submit an application to Congress for a convention that would provide these purposes: serve to reduce the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, or impose limits on the terms of some of its officials, such as congressmen, judges, or justices. Notice that the application is not for a specific amendment, but rather for amendments that serve specific purposes. This is an important consideration. Congress is then obliged to call such a convention. They have no choice in the matter. Calling a convention requires simply that Congress set the time and place for the event and invite the states to attend. At the appointed time and place, state delegates, commonly called commissioners, will arrive with instructions or commissions in their pockets describing the limits of their authority as representatives of their state. These commissions are also very important. Whatever proposed amendments passed with the majority vote of the delegations are sent to Congress to forward to the states and then require 38 ratification to become part of the Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, the debt clock is ticking. John Marshall said the people made the Constitution. It is a creature of their will, and it lives only by their will. It is up to we the people to reforge the chains of the Constitution.
Oh, let me just ask, we're having technical problems. There's apparently no microphone working except the one in front of me. Can you all hear in the back? Sound okay? All right. Is it working? It's working when it's in the mood.
Make sure the light's on in front.
It seems to be in a good mood for a moment. So I'm going to try and be a statue. My name is Jeff Lewis. I'm co-founder of the Patriot Coalition. I've been a citizen full-time for the past dozen years. I'd like to share something from Daniel Webster. He said, "It is hardly too strong to say that the Constitution was made to guard the people against the dangers of good intentions. There are men in all ages who mean to govern well, but they mean to govern. They promise to be kind masters, but they mean to be masters. They think there need be but little restraint upon themselves. The love of power may sink too deep in their hearts." I keep hearing references to restoring the Constitution to its original intent. Well, we find the original intent in the preamble. It says, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." The question tonight is not about in the weeds of whether who controls the process. There are opinions on both sides that seem valid. Some suggest the states control it, some suggest Congress does, and that won't be hammered out until there actually is one. The process is not the question before us tonight. It's whether or not we should call a convention, hold a convention to amend the Constitution. I've been doing debates. Love this thing. I've been doing debates on this issue for 3.5 years, from coast to coast. Convention of States Attorney Robert Kelly debated me in Yorktown in 2014, and he went through each article of the Constitution, of which there are 7, and he acknowledged at each instance that the problem wasn't the Constitution, that it was the President, or that it was the Congress, or that it was the courts. He never once provided one solid piece of evidence that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were flawed. They were written for the average man to protect my God-given rights and yours from vain and aspiring men. If people want to obey the 10 Commandments, should we amend them? If your spouse cheats on you, would you consider amending your marriage vows? If public servants want to uphold the Constitution, now, why is amending it the solution? I say it's not, but the states and the people already have enough, all the constitutional authority they need to rein in federal runaway bureaucrats. But the duty of the state, everybody that took that oath, that works for state and local government, has a duty to interpose, to stand between the rogue federal government and we the people. Not one legislator in Richmond had the backbone to stand up against the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012 that authorizes for our president today to do the same thing to us that they did to the Japanese, Italian, and German Americans in World War II. It violates no fewer than 14 provisions of the Constitution, some of them multiple times, including over half of the Bill of Rights. There is no authorization for a Department of Education, yet I guarantee you just about every state legislator in this country that is promoting this amending process has voted for things in the Constitution now that they know are unconstitutional, or voted in the legislature.
I am the chairman of the Constitution Party of Virginia. The Constitution Party is the only political party that stands directly opposed to the Article 5 Convention. I have in my hands a copy of the Constitution. There are a few more left that I have to give out. And to preserve the nation, go to Constitution Party of Virginia Facebook page. And it's a video, plus it's also a brochure written by Scott Bradley, who is our vice presidential candidate. I'll try to close quickly with the words, again, of Daniel Webster. I am committed to the Constitution of the country, and I am committed against everything which in my judgment may weaken, endanger, or destroy it, and especially against all extension of executive power, and I am committed against any attempt to rule the free people of this country by the power and the patronage of the government itself.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate those opening statements. I'm going to suggest we give up on the microphone. I think it's making things worse rather than better. If anyone feels you could use a little assistance projecting to the back of the room, come over and use this one, and I'll just step out of the way. And
If you can't hear us, just raise your hand.
yeah, raise your hand, wave your hands in the back. It's kind of dark back there. Was that a you can't hear?
As the former chairman of this organization, if you want to be heard, get up and stand in the middle, come up front and stand when you speak. That's the only way you're going to be heard.
With one thing I'll say, with a lot of moving around, there's only so much time. So we also have to address that issue.
Talk and move at the same
All right,
time.
let's move on, please. The audience can raise your hand if you want to address a comment to the chair. I'm going to read the first question, and we are going to start with the supporting group, Mr. Dietrich, Mr. Porter. Will give you 2 minutes to address this, and then Mr. Bloom and Mr. Lewis can respond for 2 minutes. The question is, how do we prevent the radical left from destroying the Constitution we have now, presumably if we call for a convention of the states? How do we keep that from being hijacked by the radical left? So gentlemen, you've got 2 minutes to respond to that.
As I said in my opening remarks, the instructions that the delegates bring to this convention are incredibly important. They define the limits of the authority of these gentlemen. 34 delegations will have come with the express purpose of supporting and proposing and drafting and debating only amendments that satisfy that threefold criteria that I explained. Any amendment that is proposed, a brand new constitution that is proposed, would be ruled out of order. It would be ultra vires. It would be beyond the authority of the delegates to consider. And that's what I would expect them to do, is rule those types of amendments or suggestions out of order.
Now, just follow up. I'd like to say a few words about the opening statement of our opponents. First of all, the state of Virginia did pass a law opposing the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act. While they didn't formally actively resist, say they would arrest federal agents, they did say and pass a law to such effect that they would in fact not support, not cooperate with federal agents in kidnapping Virginia residents. Secondly, what is the role of the average man in the political process? To the extent that he has any real influence, it's virtually nothing. In a republic, we rely on those we elect. That's why we have to go through that process. In our Republican, constitutional Republican form of government, we have to rely on that. That is our system. If you don't like our system, then let's resort to the Declaration of Independence and do what our founding fathers did. So that's why using the states to enforce that Constitution at this very time is the best approach to take. Thank you.
All right. Gentlemen, have a response.
First of all, I want to Virginia Facebook page and download to preserve the nation, reject a modern constitution. Covers everything, everything. And forget about radical left. We got big government from the right, big government from the left. Okay? That's the problem we have. Executive power. Okay? The Republican-controlled Congress let a Democratic-controlled Democratic president and a Republican president pass unconstitutional executive orders. They're not following the Constitution. The problem has never been that the Constitution is inferior. We haven't followed it in the 55 years of my life. That's the problem. And when, radical big government, the neocons, they're just as bad as the people on the left who be at war with everybody.
Mr. Dietrich is correct. Virginia did pass a law or a resolution that we refer to as the Warm Fuzzy Act. And the following year, they introduced.
Could you speak up?
The following year, they adopted a resolution I call the Warm Fuzzy Improvement Act. They gave the legislators a pass for not doing their duty to interpose. If you meet a police officer, or a police officer is walking down the street and he sees someone being accosted in the alleyway, and it's federal agents that's doing the accosting, all those laws that Virginia passed says is we're not going to help them accost you, but they're not going to do anything to help you either.
All right, there's a question here, and I don't know how many of you need to respond to it. Maybe that one or two people can take care of this, but there's a couple folks who raised the question about terminology. As was pointed out earlier, Article 5 simply says a convention, call it convention. We hear the phrase constitutional convention. We hear the phrase convention of the states. Is one of those terms more accurate than the other? Why use one term instead of the other? What's the significance of the terminology? So we'll start with the opposing group first on this one, and you have 2 minutes.
It's been called a constitutional convention. It's been called a plenipotentiary convention. It's been called an amendments convention. It doesn't matter what you call it. If a convention for proposing amendments, which is the terminology that Article 5 uses, is called, it is a federal process. It is a deliberative body conducting a deliberative process, and once it's convened, they can either accept, reject, or amend any of the rules that are put into place, and Mr. Nadelson, the other side's expert, has acknowledged that.
So your
It
position
doesn't matter what you
is,
call it. It's an Article 5 convention for proposing amendments.
so the terminology doesn't matter. One phrase is the same as the other.
Yeah, the other thing I want to add is if you read Article 5, by the way, you mentioned about if you have a convention, you can have 3/4 of the people at the convention ratify the Constitution without ever going to the states. That's also in Article 5. But also with the Article 5 proposing conventions, it mentions proposing amendments. You cannot, the other side is being very disingenuous. They're putting up proposals with specific items. There's nothing in that Article 5 that says they can restrict it. Even Mr. Nadelson, who is from the Goldwater Institute, who supports it, says, going so far as to specify in the resolution applying for an amendments convention that there must be an up or down vote on specific amendments, text is vulnerable to legal challenge.
Gentlemen on the pro side, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, indeed.
Terminology.
Meaning, words have meaning. I think we have to agree. Words are important, and names are important. Now, the other side, for all the time I've been involved in this process, has tried to call this a constitutional convention because the 1787 convention was called that, and so they use that as a springboard to then suggest that a new constitution could emit from this. It is only a convention for proposing amendments. That is the only name that the Constitution gives this event. And I think we should constrain ourselves to talk about how that convention will be conducted and what will come out of it.
Since words don't matter to our opponents, maybe we should just call it a Star Trek convention. Any convention is any convention, right?
I'm up for a Star Trek.
Absolutely. But anyway, on another note, as far as what our opponent said, what is it about big government? We agree. Big government, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. What can we actually do about that? Nothing that we've heard from our opponents says anything about actually addressing that in an effective way. Does anybody know what this document is right here?
Black's Law Dictionary.
No. This is the Constitution of the United States, annotated, basically. Analysis and interpretations. You may be familiar with this one. That is not the operational Constitution in this country today. This one is. And by the way, for all effective purposes, every decision or opinion by the Supreme Court is effectively an amendment to the Constitution. If you don't know that or refuse to believe that, then you're not part of the debate. You're not going to be effective. This is what we have to address. This is the real basis of our government today.
This question will start with the pro side. And the question is this. Since Article 5 says that it is that the states, let me get the language in front of me because it's not on the card, when there's an application by the legislatures of 2/3 of the states, and then Congress calls a convention, how do we get out of that who is going to control who the delegates are? How do we know who these delegates will be or who will select them?
The Supreme Court has ruled that an Article 5 convention, or the amendment process per se, is not part of the legislative power of Congress. So Congress is only empowered to do what the Constitution specifically tells them to do, which is call a convention. Calling a convention means there will be a convention at such and such a date, such and such a place, and you, the states, are invited to attend. That is the limit of Congress's authority. The President has no play in this, as the Supreme Court has ruled, and neither does the necessary and proper clause come into effect, which is a legislative act, a legislative power of Congress. So the calling of the convention is merely setting the time and place and inviting the states to attend. Everything else that takes place in that convention will be as the convention itself dictates. They will set their own rules. There are already draft rules prepared and will be proposed to them to start off. So everything from that calling point forward is under the control of the convention.
There have been 37 conventions since the 17th century in the Americas. In every single one of them, the convention delegates have controlled the convention. It has not been decided by any outside party. And that's up to and including 2 conventions that occurred in 1861. The Washington Convention, which was convened to avoid civil war by the northern states, and the Montgomery Convention, which was convened to establish a new constitution. In no case whatsoever can it be determined that any convention was established or ruled by some outside body.
I'm going to claim moderator's prerogative here and give you a quick follow-up on that. It seems to me you can say that the convention itself will set its rules for operation, but one fundamental question that has to be decided going in is the same question that was so difficult at the original Constitutional Convention. Does each state get one vote, or do you have representation based on population? If California wants a lot more representatives than Rhode Island coming into the convention, how is that decided? Because that's going to determine how the convention makes its decisions. Do you have any thoughts on that? And then we will go to this side.
I'll address that real quickly. it doesn't really matter which form of the representation in the convention is taken. The members of that convention, the delegates or commissioners, will determine the mode of decision-making, of voting, basically. That can be one state, one vote, which has been the historical method. It can be by representation of the population of each of the states. In either case, there will be a significant Republican majority in such a convention. We have nothing to fear by taking either approach.
Okay, gentlemen on the opposing side.
Okay. First, the 1787 convention was to amend the Articles of Confederation. Okay? They realized that the Articles of Confederation basically mentioned 13 states. It had no way of expanding. So they definitely had to rewrite the Constitution. And at that, the legislatures decided who was going to vote. Go to the convention. I think there was 81 delegates, 56 showed up. This is what's going to happen at any convention. Okay? And the other question is, who are the Democrats and Republicans going to select? Are they going to select party bosses? Are they going to select legislative? The people that made this mess, are they going to be the ones to reform the Constitution? That is dangerous. You can take the rest.
If you need that to interpret this, you probably had a public education. This was written for the average man. Supreme Court at one time understood and acknowledged that it was written for the average voter.
Jeff, they're having trouble here.
Reject.
Just use that.
I'm fighting the cold.
This was written for Joe and Jane Citizen. It was not written for ivory tower, eggheads, and for attorneys. It was written for you and I. This process debate is a moot point if we don't address the root issue. Ask the wrong questions and the answers won't matter. Who controls it is irrelevant. We don't need one.
All right, this question goes first to the opposition side. If you're not in favor of a convention, give us a plan. Give us an agenda to solve some of the problems we're facing today.
As again, I am the chairman of the Constitution Party of Virginia. We have two corrupt political parties, Democrat, Republican. 95% of the American people voted for a pathological liar who is also a national security risk. The American people, you, have to say, do what France did. They kicked out both their political parties. I'm running candidates for all 13 congressional districts and Senate. Anybody want to run? That's how you scare them. Competition. 3 parties, guess what? 50% doesn't win. 35% can win. And I take it 35% of you are conservative and believe in limited government. I'll take my chances. Anybody want to run against Scott Taylor?
She's here. She's here.
Don't take that away from us.
If we'd like to gather at another time and go into some detail, I've got a lot of detail for you. But as co-founder and currently National Director of Legislative Affairs for Patriot Coalition.org and Senior Advisor for WeDoBetter.org, we look at things to educate the people and to empower the people and to remove power from bureaucrats and special interest groups. And I brought some things to share with y'all after the debate along that line. This is not a debate about my proposed solution. It's theirs. If If you want to discuss real solutions to this problem, we have to start by looking in the mirror and holding ourselves accountable. And when politicians come around asking for your vote to put them in office, it's always, how do you feel? How do you feel about this issue? How do you feel about that issue? I care about one thing from a politician wanting my vote. Will you keep your oath to uphold not the example of what are wrong, but what it says to the right?
I guess for gentlemen in the supporting side, maybe the best way to phrase the question is, how do you respond to the arguments of those who think that another approach would be as effective or more effective?
Neither Dave nor I insist that an Article 5 convention is going to fix all of our problems. It is not. We clearly need to elect better representatives. But what is a better representative? I'm not sure there's agreement to that question. We need to educate the public. Absolutely. But neither of those solutions will fix the problems with the document that the Supreme Court has created. They have created a constitution of Swiss cheese that means whatever Congress wants it to mean. And they can then obey the Constitution, which they do, with the authority given them by the Supreme Court. Now, it was alleged earlier that the 1787 Convention was created to amend the Articles of Confederation. That is not borne out by the historical record. That convention was called by the 5 states that attended the Annapolis Convention of 1786. They called the convention, and they asked Congress to endorse the idea, which they did 5 months later. But in those intervening 5 months, 7 states had already appointed their delegates, instructed their delegates to go to Philadelphia in May of the following year. Congress did endorse the idea and suggested it would be to revise the Articles of Confederation. But Congress also, in their resolution, said the delegates were empowered to render the federal Constitution adequate to the exigencies of government and the preservation of the Union. That was the limit of their authority. If revising the Articles would have done that, they would have done that. But the revising of the Articles would not have succeeded in rendering the federal Constitution adequate to the needs of the Union.
As you've heard here tonight from our opponents, they have no plan. As he said, it's not about them, it's about us. What are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to do something in lieu of nothing. This is a constitutional remedy. That's what we're trying to establish. And the other comment I must address, this, according to our opponents, the real Constitution should be ignored. I can't believe someone would say something like that. Thank you.
Okay, let's... got so many good questions here. It's hard to know where to go. We're starting with the pro side, and let's ask this question: could the convention, if called, make truly fundamental changes in the nature of our governmental system? Could they eliminate the bicameral legislature, eliminate the presidential veto, create a state religion, do things that would be viewed as huge changes to our constitutional structure? Is that a possibility?
34 states will have sent delegates to this convention with the application call that I laid out. All amendments must either reduce the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, or impose limits on the terms of its officials. Any amendment that does not satisfy that threefold criteria is out of order. So, an amendment that doesn't satisfy that criteria will not receive a vote of the convention. It's pretty clear. That is the authority of the delegates of 34. Now, there may be 50 states that attend this thing, but 34, a clear supermajority, is going to rule what happens in that convention.
Why would 34 states who apply for a convention turn around and do something completely different with their delegates in that convention? It absolutely is beyond comprehension that that would be imaginable. I mean, you can imagine anything, sure. Anything is possible in some infinitesimal way, but not that. They're going to follow their remit and do what they're told to do and what they're sent there for. If they don't, guess what? The ratification process addresses that. By the way, how many conventions have been accomplished or established, how many amendments proposed by Congress since 1971? How many conventions have we had? How many new constitutions have been submitted by Congress or written by Congress and given to us in the 230 years of our existence? The number obviously is 0. Okay? They have the exact same authority as the states do, delegates do in convention. And here's where we are.
First of all, I didn't have much time at the beginning to say this, but the Constitution Party nationwide is now a participating sponsor of the Conservative Political Action Conference. I want everyone that stands for liberty in the Constitution to help and pack CPAC with as many constitutionalists as you can. We are going to promote this. And I also, by the way, I also suggested that they have Scott Bradley oppose the Article 5 Convention against someone like, let's say, Senator Ted Cruz or Mark Levin, but he'd probably rather sell books and actually debate an issue. So come and help us pack the House in the second or third week in February 21st to the 24th. I will be there, and I want as many Virginians to come along with me. Okay, you can take the rest.
I think I need to stand a little closer to Mr. Dietrich because he's putting words in my mouth. And perhaps Mr. Porter needs to read the Convention of States application because nowhere in there will you find the word reduce. In fact, in the debate that I did with Mr. Kelly here in Yorktown 3 years ago, he acknowledged, and you can go look it up in Black's Law Dictionary, limit does not mean reduce. Limit just means place limits. There are already limits. An application that just says, the sky's the limit, evidently. Words do matter. And when words lose their meaning, people lose their liberty.
This was a little bit of a change of pace, so we'll get a different twist on this on the table, thinking more about the substance of how the Constitution might be amended. One of our guests tonight asked, what about a requirement that to be eligible to serve as President or Vice President of the United States, an individual would have to have military experience to prepare them to be Commander-in-Chief? Would you propose that a convention or an amendment enacted through some other means should make that a requirement? Mr. Bloom's showing us that he is qualified to serve as President. So, you can respond to that. Would that be part of the substance?
Yes, first of all, anybody needs to have a security clearance to be President of the United States. Unfortunately, the only person who doesn't have to have a security clearance is the President of the United States. Jared Kushner's under investigation for whether he should get a security clearance, but the President of the United States, who had 5, or was it 4, failed bankruptcies, which couldn't get a clearance if his life depended on it, is now the Commander-in-Chief. Yes, we need people that take an oath to the Constitution of the United States. And every member of the military took that oath. But I don't think Donald Trump did. Oh, he's right. He did that on when he got inaugurated. I'm sorry.
I would be opposed to such an amendment, and I would go for a veteran myself.
I'm not going to, I didn't come here to debate specific amendments. It is a particular feature of the Convention of States Projects initiative that they are not proposing specific amendments. That is up to the convention. They only propose that the delegations consider amendments that reduce the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, impose fiscal restraints on it, and impose term limits on their officials. Anything else is up to the convention. I will leave it to the convention to use their best judgment. As long as an amendment satisfies that threefold criteria, it's fine with me.
Just one further remark. While this this particular forum is not for debating anything beyond a convention of states, or excuse me, a convention for proposing amendments. I would just like to say, any oath taken today by any official in public office is to this document. It is to this document, not to the little one. They may not know it, but this is the ruling authority in this country. To deny it doesn't change the reality.
We are closing in on the end of our time. Let me put this one out for and I apologize, that was a semi-irrelevant question, but I thought it was interesting, so I threw it in. Let's go back to the pro side and ask this. Could the convention, if one is called, submit proposed amendments to the ballot of the citizens and let the citizens of America decide whether to implement the convention's proposals instead of state legislatures?
The convention must follow the Constitution. I hope we agree on that.
We agree too.
Okay? So the Constitution only gives Congress one option, to either select ratification by the state legislatures or ratification in conventions of the people. That is the only option they are given. So Congress will decide, based on the amendments that they are given by the convention, which process of ratification will be used. Any other process is ultra vires. It is beyond the authority of Congress to decide.
And just to add to that, the wording, they propose the ratification process. Think the word propose, since words do have meaning, that is not a mandatory statement. It is a recommended statement. The states legally could choose to do something different, and if the Congress chooses not to follow their remit of calling the convention and making the proposal, guess what? The states have that authority already inherent. They can do it themselves.
I'm not sure if you mentioned this in the Article 5. This one really struck me as scared the hell out of me, let's put it that way. As of one of the other modes of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. They could basically say 51% of those in the convention, and it gets passed. Article 5, it says, I quote, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. Congress can change the ratification process.
If I may I follow up on that?
I would like to.
I just want to be clear on what Article 5 says. When you propose amendments, whether it's through a convention or through 2/3 of the House or 2/3 of the Senate, Article 5 says, in either case, those amendments shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of the Constitution when ratified, 1, by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or 2, by conventions in 3/4 of the several states, as one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by Congress. I believe the only choice Congress has at the ratification end is to whether to let state legislatures vote on it or whether to call special conventions in all 50 states. In either case, you need 38 to ratify.
Find me something I can agree with Mr. Deacon.
I said, finally, something I can agree with Mr. Dietrich on. His explanation of the ratification choice Congress may propose, and they usually do that up front based on whether they think the legislatures are better suited to make that decision on those amendments, or if they think the people at large should be involved. And it is a proposal, and it does say may. And in every instance in the Constitution where it says shall, it's a mandate, and where it says may, it's optional. So it is, I do believe, that in the state's purview, how those state ratification conventions would be comprised if it was put that way to them by Congress.
All right, we're going to take one more question, and then we will move into 5-minute closing statements by each side. So we start with the negative side here, and here's the question. Given that any proposed constitutional amendments have to be ratified by 38 out of the 50 states, and given that there are more than 12 red states and more than 12 blue states, is there actually any likelihood that any of this is going to happen? Are we having an academic discussion, or is there a real possibility that these amendments, if they're made, would be ratified? Mr. Bloom, Mr. Lewis? I've got cards all over. You may repeat the question? Okay. The question was, since you need 3/4 of the states to ratify, is anything really going to happen?
The general rule of thumb Congress has used is a 7-year window for ratification. That allows 3 state legislative election cycles. You see what happens when special interest and big money rolls in to push an issue and they don't get it in this legislature. They will primary, they will spend a ton of money to get rid of the people that are in the way, and they've got 3 election cycles to either buy state legislators or to get rid of those who oppose their agenda. It happens all the time. If you think it won't happen over a constitutional amendment, I don't think you're looking at it, honestly.
Yeah, there's one thing I want to mention is that Dr. Scott Bradley mentioned that there are a whole bunch of different, in each state they have passed one of these resolutions for petitioners to say one might be a balanced budget amendment, maybe term limits, you name it. And they add them all together. You know, and it's so disingenuous. The proposal should be to have a convention for proposing amendments. This should not mention any amendments. And you know what? If they had that, they would pass none of them.
It is a convention for proposing amendments, and there is an inclusive group of amendment types for this proposed amendment convention for proposing amendments. Without a doubt. They all have to have the same language for those applications to be successful. And that is what's happening, or has happened already in 12 states. Now, to address the question about whether or not sufficient numbers of legislatures can meet that threshold of 34 states to begin with, and 38 states to ratify. It certainly is problematic. Where's the fear in that? That's the way our system should be. It should be a fight to change our Constitution. But 31 state legislatures today are blue. So, I'm sorry, red, other color. So our Republican control. So we're close on the 34. It'll take some work to get beyond that. But again, where's the fear in that? Okay, we're fighting to get to that higher number, but that's not a danger to our system. That shows the problem, the real difficulty in actually making effective changes to be successful.
I am not concerned at all about whether a proposed amendment actually gets ratified. I want people to see, first of all, that a convention can be conducted safely and can produce cogent recommendations, cogent amendments. But think of the educational advantage or the educational opportunity a convention will present. Everyone will be talking about it. More people will learn about their Constitution because a convention is underway than would ever learn about it in any other way. That is a great advantage.
I want to, at this point, just pause to thank all of you for these great questions. I obviously haven't covered anywhere near all of them. Time doesn't permit it. Many good questions presented this evening. We're going to go to each of our teams again, and starting with the affirmative group, you each have 5 minutes as a team to make a closing statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing a fundamental transformation of America. Traditional values are disappearing. Congress is not beholden to the American people. The states no longer influence federal policy. The federal courts are not beholden to the American people. They do not base their decisions on the U.S. Constitution. Unelected bureaucrats are not beholden to the American people. Administrative regulations have the impact of law. Our education system is indoctrinating our youth at an alarming rate. 50 million people are enrolled in K through 12. The Constitution of the United States is no longer recognizable. It continues to grow at an alarming rate. And here's what you see today. Nearly 3,000 pages. So what are some remedies proposed by our opponents? Properly educate Americans. Numerous organizations are emphasizing constitutional studies. Elect the right people. We need to primary everyone with Tea Party advocates. Tell the federal officials to abide by the Constitution. Hold them accountable by petitioning and assembling. Nullify federal laws and decisions that we deem unconstitutional. Get states to band together against federal tyranny. Do nothing. We don't want to upset the apple cart. There's really nothing wrong. We can accept conditions as they are today. Well, we argue against those remedies. Educating is great, but it can't compete with government indoctrination, probably reaching less than 1% of public school enrollees. Electing good people is great, but what has it done in the last 10 years? How about the last 100? No matter the election results, nothing seems to change. Federal officials are abiding by the Constitution, but what if they don't? They are, in fact, abiding by the Constitution. That's the Constitution that they've sworn their oath to. Constitution annotated in the Supreme Court allow virtually anything. Nullification is good in a limited way, but what if everyone doesn't agree? It's too unpredictable, temporary, and chaotic. It has the potential to produce effective policy. Very key note to make. Effective policy. It empowers the states like nothing else. It has strong grassroots support. The Convention of States project exists in every state. It is the only effective way to reverse federal law and court decisions. No state law can change what we now have. There is no better alternative. No other so-called conservative group has a better answer. Republicans control sufficient state legislatures to make it happen. As I said, we're at 31 and we're pushing for more. So what's the way forward? Our opponents here are part of a group of anti-constitutionalists. The Patriot Coalition claims they strictly adhere to the Constitution, except for parts of Article 5. The Constitution Party says it stands for states' powers, except for a convention for proposing amendments. The John Birch Society is all about educating and activating Americans, except in regard to a convention for proposing amendments. Oath Keepers is about convincing others to defend the Constitution, except the parts they don't like. So by opposing Article 5 convention, they all actually oppose the Constitution itself. Shall we stand with such as these? We cannot accept such undermining of our constitutional republic. We need an Article 5 convention for proposing amendments today. Let's look to Patrick Henry, who was for state sovereignty. So in supporting the revolution, why stand we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. And then in opposing the Constitution itself, he did not believe in it because he thought it gave too much authority to a central government. And so in his final words before the Virginia Convention in the ratification process, he stated, "I wish not to go to violence, but will wait with hope that the spirit which predominated in the revolution is not yet gone, nor the cause of those who are attached to the revolution not yet lost. I shall therefore wait in expectation of seeing that government changed so as to be compatible with the safety, liberty, and happiness of the people." Thank you very much.
oath to support and defend this against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Not once did I take an oath to that book. That book is the Constitution with notes. That's what annotated means, with notes. Notes of the history of the abuses of it, because we the people have failed to do our duty. Taking an oath to uphold this requires a personal working knowledge of it. To take that oath without a working knowledge, not of that big fat book, but of the Constitution, is perjury. Plain and simple. We do not need, and I reject or resent Mr. Dietrich suggesting that I'm against the Constitution. I have never said once that I oppose Article 5. I oppose using it today for the reasons suggested. It's the wrong solution to the wrong problem. The problem's in the mirror, people. We're the problem because we won't uphold it. It won't uphold itself. And changing the words on it won't make the people in Richmond or Washington, D.C. follow some new magical words. This is pretty clear. It's just that simple. Read it. It means what it says, and it says what it means. You don't need that fat book to hide behind for not upholding an oath to this.
James Madison put it this way: the powers of the government are clear and defined, not that book. We have a crisis here. We don't have state. There won't be a battle of states. There'll be a battle between the Democratic and Republican parties if we don't stop them. They're going to take our rights away. Some of the proposed amendments that they didn't mention to you, an amendment clarifying the meaning of the Second Amendment. An amendment removing the Second Amendment. This is what we're at stake. All of our Bill of Rights. They claim that they defend the Constitution. We support Article 5, the way they've done it 200 plus years, amending the Constitution. What's wrong with putting an amendment, pushing Congress and your buddies in the Republican Party to push the amendments in the other states to get it past Congress and then go to the states? That's the old way is the right way. That's the reason that nobody else used it.
Let me just wrap up with a couple of quick comments. Thomas Jefferson, always a great advocate of state sovereignty and limited national government, except when he bought like half the country. Besides that, he was pretty consistent. Jefferson suggested that we ought to hold a constitutional convention about once a generation and redo the thing and make sure that it stays current. And depending on your views, that's either a really exciting or a really scary proposition. We live in a different country than we did in Jefferson's day. In Jefferson's day, these decisions would have been made by a relatively small political elite. He knew who the guys were who'd be going in 20 years and having a convention. Is that still wisdom for our day? I'll leave that for you to decide. Second comment, y'all would really love my constitutional law class. I am one of very few law professors in the country who doesn't get around to reading Supreme Court cases until about a month into the semester because we're talking about the document, not about what the Supreme Court says. So send your kids and grandkids to Regent Law School and I'll teach them how to do it right. I want to say thank you to these four gentlemen for a very civil, informative conversation. Tea Party for putting this on for us. This has been a great evening, and I thank you all for your attendance. Thank you.
Please hold your seats for a minute because we have a couple of announcements. I'd like to introduce the lady that answered the call. Somebody said who would run against Scott Taylor. Miss Mary Jones.
Yes, sir. I already talked to him.
discussion. However, I would say, in my humble opinion, if we cannot elect people that will be accountable to this, what makes us think changing it is going to change the people of the I'm running the service as the representative in the 2nd Congressional District, and I, when elected, will work with urgency with our president to repeal Obamacare. We need to secure our borders because of a threat to our nation's sovereignty, the open borders that we have been allowing. We also need to rebuild and restore our military and cut spending and cut taxes. So thank you.
And one last announcement I'd like to bring to the floor. Michelle Riley here, who due to a Tea Party initiative to get an education committee started, has done a remarkable thing.
Hi everybody, I just wanted to give everybody a quick reminder. We have started an education association, it's called VV Spark, and we are holding a launch party on November 15th at Chick's Oyster Bar from 5 to 7 p.m. We'll have appetizers and live music, and we hope that you will join us.
What does it do?
It's an education association. We're trying to help reform our public schools here in Virginia Beach.
We're trying to give a voice to the children and the parents. Not just the Okay. Our meeting now is over. If you would like to